Um, we are a little bit late starting, but we'll catch up. Um, so to get us started, I'm going to welcome Dr. Male Fofana, who is the head and regional director for the Global Green Growth Institute, to do welcoming remarks on behalf of the partners of the Africa NDC Hub. Dr. Male, please.
Thank you very much, Linus. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. All right, now I can feel it. So I think a very welcome to this important session on national determined contributions in Africa. As we gather today here, I remind me of a story of a resilience and transformation village. It's called Jubel, where my grandfather is actually from, and we are from, because I'm a second generation from Mali, and we're actually based in Senegal. It's a small village. The community face really challenged when it comes to climate change. And which is passing year, they witness longer droughts, rainfall, during harvest as well. But also their life was really difficult. But the people of my village were not defeated. They knew that they held the power to change their destiny. Inspired by the collective spirit, they embark on a journey of adaptation and sustainability. They plant drought-resilient crops, start harvesting rainwater, and embracing renewable energy sources. Slowly but surely, they begin to transform the village. The story is unique. And I will say it is not also unique in the sense that it's echo across our continent in Africa, not only where I come from, where communities, governments, but also organizations are taking actions to address the impact of the climate change. NDCs are the roadmap guiding this collective effort, offering hopes and direction in the face of this adversity. The Africa NDC Hub was launched in November 2017 at the Africa Day of the 23rd United Framework Climate Change Conference Party, COP23, in Bonn. The hub is a direct response to the call made by the African countries for support toward the implementation of the NDC. Its goal is to provide African countries with the tools required for the effective delivery of the Paris Agreement commitments in the coordinated manner in accordance with the development priorities. The hub also serves as a collaborative platform for member institutions to explore ways and means to eventually deliver the NDC support. In this session, we have the privilege to bring together experts, thought leaders, and passionate individuals for diverse backgrounds, all sharing common goals to advance an understanding of NDC and the immense potential they hold for Africa. Just like the village in our story, we too have the power to drive the change, to sow the seed of sustainability, and to harvest the future. This is not only resilience, but prosperity as well. Let's make this most of this session, share our own story, and work collaboratively toward this brighter, more sustainable future in Africa. Once again, a warm welcome to and thank you for your dedication of making positive impact in our continent and the world. Let our discussion today be a testament of the enduring spirit of Africa and our shared commitment to shape a more sustainable future. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Male, for those wonderful welcoming remarks on behalf of the partners of the NDC, Africa NDC Hub, for the African development. And thank you for giving us that crystallization of building resilience and communities taking it in their hands with support to build resilience and adapt to climate change and build resilience. So, ladies and gentlemen, allow me now to call on Dr. Alhamdou Dusuma, Director from the African Climate Bank, Division of Climate Change and Green Growth, to give us a keynote. Dr. Dusuma, thank you.
Thank you very much, Linus. We are still the African Development Bank, unless you want us to change the name to Africa Climate Bank. Yes.
So this is probably a sign from that we want you to do more funding.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Let me also, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me also add my voice to what Mali said to welcome you to this very important event. We all know why we are here. We are here to address one of the most pressing challenges of our time and to highlight the urgent need to accelerate climate action in Africa and also to close the gap between ambitions and actions. In line with the theme of the Africa Climate Week, which is driving green growth and climate finance solution for Africa and the world, we are of the view that the Africa NDC Hub remains a critical platform to drive transformative solutions to the needs and barriers to NDC ambition and implementation. Through partnerships, collaboration, and advocacy, African countries are receiving support from the NDC Hub partners to meet their climate commitments. As you all know, Africa is on the front lines of climate change, experiencing the impacts of a warming planet firsthand. Yet, it is a continent with immense potential for sustainable development and green growth. To harness this potential, the gap between ambition and climate action should be bridged. The African Development Bank has recently issued what we call the African Economic Outlook Report. And the report showed that Africa will need between 1.3 and 1.6 billion US dollars between 2020 and 2030 to implement the commitments to the Paris Agreement and also the African NDCs. Yet, Africa receives, as you know, only 3% of global climate financing, a meager 18 billion per year against its estimated needs of between 118 billion to 145 billion annually. As the largest development finance institution in the African continent, the African Development Bank is playing its part to supporting Africa's transition to a low carbon and climate resilient future. The bank has committed to investing 25 billion US dollars in climate financing by 2025, with 50% of this committed to adaptation finance, because this is Africa's priority and it is also our priority, as this has been called by the global community under the Paris Agreement. In fact, the bank has even exceeded this commitment, with 67% of our annual climate finance last year allocated as adaptation finance, the highest level globally on adaptation finance. The bank has also adopted 2 years ago a climate change and green growth strategic framework, a new one for the period 2021-2030, which is ambitious and which provides a framework for strengthening and enhancing adaptation action, mitigation action, climate finance, and also creating the enabling environment within African countries. The nationally determined contributions of African countries are the core part of our climate mitigation and adaptation strategies. As of September 2023, 47 African countries have revised their NDCs and 3 have submitted second NDCs. Countries have also made significant and ambitious commitments in these NDCs, translating some of those pledges into tangible actions on the ground. Yet, action on the ground still remains a daunting task. Also, only 8 African countries have developed their long-term strategies on climate change, and 13 have investment plans. This reflects some level of commitment from the countries and progress towards accessing climate finance, although accessed funds are not yet commensurate to the actual needs. In this regard, the Africa NDC Hub, hosted by the African Development Bank in collaboration with other development partners, is a collaborative platform to support African countries with their NDC ambition and implementation. The hub focuses on 3 key pillars, which include 1, fostering long-term low carbon and climate resilient pathways; Number 2, mobilizing means of implementation. And number 3, promoting partnerships and advocacy. The Africa NDC Hub has a work program that provides for countries' priorities towards NDC implementation, including development of long-term strategies, NDC investment plans, NDC revisions, and also providing capacity building. As we lead up to Global Stocktake and also COP28, the Africa NDC Hub has, during the Africa Climate Summit, financed a 2-day seminar on the readiness of African countries for the enhanced transparency framework that brought together over 40 technical experts from across the continent to peer learn and share best practices on monitoring and reporting on the Paris Agreement. One important platform that the African Development Bank has created is the Africa Climate Change Fund, ACCF. This fund is a multi-donor trust fund of the African Development Bank dedicated to supporting capacity building for African countries on access to climate finance and achieving green growth. The ACCF has supported countries like Cameroon, Sao Tome, Uganda, and Namibia to design green bankable projects and create green project registries. The fund has also supported Senegal, Cape Verde, and Tanzania to develop strategic tools to mainstream climate mitigation and climate resilience into the development strategies. It is also supporting Botswana, Gabon, Lesotho, Liberia, Ethiopia, Burkina Faso, and Mozambique to develop NDCs and LTS investment plans. To further raise more climate action resources, especially for the low-income countries in Africa, the bank has also initiated last year an instrument called Climate Action Window under its 50 years old Africa Development Fund. The Climate Action Window, which has an initial capitalization of about 429 million, will finance transformative investments as well as technical assistance in what we call ADF countries, the most climate vulnerable countries in Africa. These are 37 countries. So the Climate Action Window wishes to raise between 4 billion to 13 billion for climate adaptation for these countries. The funds aims to provide both grants and soft loans to African countries to develop impactful climate mitigation and adaptation initiatives with a particular focus on adaptation. At the meeting that we held last year to adopt the new instrument, we committed to strengthening adaptation actions across Africa through that new initiative. We also recognize that the bulk of funds for NDC support in the future will have to come from private sector. It is for this reason that at this summit, the African Development Bank has launched 2 flagship initiatives. The first one is a new vision and a strategy for what we call the African Financial Alliance on Climate Change, AFAC, which engages with Africa's financial sector to de-risk and direct capital flows towards low carbon and climate resilient investment on the continent. The new strategy of this African Financial Alliance on Climate Change seeks to strengthen the voice of the African financial industry in the global climate discourse. The second initiative that we launched at this summit is the Africa Climate Risk Insurance Facility, ACRIFA, which aims to tap into a network of 150 insurers and reinsurers. The ACRIFA aims to develop climate insurance solutions for Africa's climate adaptation. This will change the lives of millions of Africans, especially farmers. The African Development Bank will mobilize 1 billion through this Africa program. These flagship programs demonstrate that Africa is not without solutions. Africa just lacks international partnership and support to drive climate action at scale. To conclude, I would like to reassure you that the African Development Bank is committed to strengthening partnerships through the Africa NDC Hub to supporting African countries on this journey, serving as a platform for knowledge exchange, technical assistance, and partnerships. However, The success of our collective endeavor as partners hinges on our willingness to work together across borders and sectors to confront these challenges head-on. In conclusion, let us view the challenges before us as opportunities for innovation, growth, and sustainable development. Together, we can bridge the ambition gaps and chart a course towards a brighter, greener, and more resilient Africa, and by extension, a better world. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alhamdu. Now, with all those tools, now you see why I was calling you the Africa Climate Bank, and we can see all the windows opportunities that are there that the NDC partnership can leverage to support our countries to implement their NDCs, to build resilience, to adapt, and so on. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have now the rest of the session in two parts. We're going to have two panels. The first panel will be looking at a discussion on resilience and adaptation. We'll be hearing from our member states and from our development partners on what are the experiences that they're having in the countries and what support is being provided. So I would like to call the first panel in terms of our member states from Burkina Faso. I would like to call Sir Alain Kabasere. Is in the room. No? Okay. From Ethiopia, I want to call Mr. Mohamed Andoshe, who is the Director General of the Climate Environmental Protection Authority. Fantastic. Please join us on the table. From Rwanda, we have Mr. Alex Mulisa, who is the Strategic Advisor of a Task Force on Access to Climate Finance in FONEWA. No? They might join us as we speak, so if they do, they will join us on the stage. Then from our implementing partners, we're supposed to have Mr. Diarra from Agence Française, no? It's not in the room. And also from the Islamic Development Bank, Mr. Dauda Benuma, dear. Please join us on the stage. Sanda, you are the Climate Change and Environment at the Islamic Development Bank. And from the UNFPA, we have our colleague Angela Bashiri, who is a policy advisor. Please join us on the stage. So, sorry. So we also have our colleague from WWF for the panel, who is also a member of the Africa NDC Hub. Please join us on the stage. Okay. So whilst we wait to see if our other panelists will be joining us, we would like to start from the country experience from Ethiopia. So, Mr. Andoshe, can you please, what are some of the barriers that you feel are preventing countries from increasing their NDC's ambition? And I know that Ethiopia is one of the very first countries that did NDCs, very ambitious and so on. But in that experience, what do you see so far as some of the barriers and challenges that are preventing the country from increasing its NDC ambition? And the next question I want to ask you is, what are the capacity building needs that you think are needed to support Ethiopia to strengthen its ability to effectively implement its NDCs? The microphone is there, yeah.
Yeah. Good evening. Thank you for the invitation. I think as country context in Ethiopia, the government already committed to tackle impact of the climate change, particularly in terms of adaptation and in terms of how vulnerability is reduced for the particular factors. Like for instance, we have already launched the National Adaptation Plan in 2017, which is mainly focused on how the vulnerability is reduced and diversifies the livelihood diversification in particular community, as well as maintaining sustainable ecosystems. So based on that, we have identified around 8 sectors, which is the most vulnerable sectors, particularly agriculture, water, forests, and other sectors. So we have also identified 18 adaptation options to tackle, especially for implementing in across the sectoral context. So that this adaptation is one of part of NDC, because we already submitted the updated NDC at July 2021, but focusing on adaptations as well as mitigation. So based on the updated NDC, especially we already identified 18 adaptation options for the NAP, National Adaptation Plan. But in case of updating NDC, these options or this intervention is enhanced for 14 adaptation options. Because of the impact of climate change, there should be an interventions which is focusing on how the vulnerability is reduced, how the ecosystem is sustained, particularly how the livelihood diversified in terms of vulnerability. So this updated NDC has, unique for us, particularly since as a country, or not only country, as the region Africas, we are, insignificant for contributing GHG emissions, but we are still dealing with committed as based on the Paris Agreement. We have committed, especially the government of Ethiopia is more committed by planting billions of trees for in terms of tackling the impact of climate change, both in terms of mitigation as well as adaptation. So we are committed for around 69% of the emission is reduced for 2013. So that we have still committed. So based on your questions, I think the gap is still there in terms of, maintaining institutional capacity, particularly how the institution is maintained, which is identified as vulnerability, because most of the issue is related with maintaining sustainability in terms of capacity, in terms of technical, in terms of financing, because we have already identified conditional and unconditional in terms of update NDC, especially some finance from the development partner need to be there. So one of the challenges actually is the financing, and also especially how the climate issue is, integrated with the research, especially the impact is, coming, several times with updating the impacts based on the research, as well as the different assessments, especially based on the IPCC and other international scientific research, to be aligned with context of the national context. That has some of the gap. And also especially we have already launched and submitted our long-term low emission development strategy for 2050. So still we are focusing on adaptation for the coming 30 years, because the vulnerability, especially as the Horn of Africa, we are the more vulnerable. Every time is happening in droughts, flooding, and other climatic impact. So that we have to tackle with in strategic pattern, especially the NDC partnership has give us a lot of support starting from previous years, especially Margaret and guys there. So they are supporting us, particularly identifying those gap based on the sectoral context, which is already identified. So still we have some gaps. So we will strengthen our partnership so as to tackle the impact of climate change as the regional context as well as the national context. So this is what I have here. Thank you for this.
Amasigonalu ato Andoshe, which means Amasigonalu is thank you in Amarinya, in Ethiopian language. So thank you very much, Andoshe, for that. Indeed, Ethiopia has been a big leader. I mean, Ethiopia is described as the land of origins, right? So it is always leading in a lot of things. And I think in terms of the NDCs, we did a lot of work in this area. And in terms of the nature-based solutions that you mentioned about the tree planting, the Green Legacy program of the Prime Minister, that was really big. And I think it's also something that we at the Economic Commission for Africa are also proud to have been able to support with an integrated tree planting program where you're not only just planting trees, but you're planting productive trees for catchment conservation, in so doing reducing erosion and siltation into dams because Ethiopia is very much hydro, and because it's productive trees, you're providing business opportunities, especially for young men and women, and so young people and women. So that is very good. But you say the main challenge is finance, and you've mentioned some of the finance or some of the support that you're getting from partners. And you also mentioned some of the support that you get from NDC partnership in terms of helping you identify. But the finance bit is really key, right? Because my colleague and sister Rita here from the IEA, I think I heard you making a presentation the other day saying that because you mentioned about conditional and unconditional NDCs. Most of the time we're just talking about NDCs, right? But a lot of the NDCs are based on conditional availability of finance. And I think you mentioned it was about 1.2 trillion, if I'm not mistaken, of NDCs are based on availability of finance. Where is that money going to come from? This is a big problem. But we have an Islamic Development Bank. They have money, right? Like the Climate Bank and so on. So can you tell us, please, Ms. Ndaye, what kind of support, especially in terms of finance for implementation, can our countries expect to have from development financial institutions? And I always say this, and I say this to all my colleagues and friends from the development banks, that they seem to always forget that their mandate is development, right? So, Mr. Dr. Alhamdu, yeah, your mandate is development, which means you have to take a lot of risk, which means you have to give a lot of monies for countries to do things which normally they will not get under normal financing. So please share with us some of the experiences that you've been having in terms of supporting member states with implementation of NDCs, particularly in terms of investment. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. No, thank you. Thank you very much. And I think you can refer to the African Development Bank as a climate bank for Africa, but in our case, we will be more modest. So we are supporting our member countries. You have 57 member countries. Half of them are in Africa. And yes, it's true that the needs are huge. The numbers were provided earlier by Alhamdu. Supporting the NDC process and the LTS process is, like you said, supporting development, right? But at the same time, the development of the NDC does not necessarily reflect the whole need of, the whole trajectory that the country has to take in terms of low emission and everything. So you have to work with the assumption that all of the operations that you are supporting have to be climate resilient and have to have the potential to reduce emission. And then at the country level, there will be, and I think later we will talk about the whole transparency aspect when it comes to assessing the effectiveness of the NDC implementation. But that would be the role at the national level. So us as banks, really, we commit to making our investments resilient, climate resilient, and also we look at all aspects of low carbon development in our investments. And at the same time, you know that we have all committed to Paris alignment. Most of it, you know, between July 2023 to end of this year, all of the MDBs are going to be Paris aligned. What it means is that really the whole of the interventions supporting our different constituencies are going to look at that angle of, you know, achieving the objectives of the Paris Agreement. So this goes, of course, from the policy side, the capacity building side, to the investment, and the NDC or LTS investment plans that we see more and more in African countries. I think those are a very good start. Now the thing is, are they all supported by the ministries of finance of the countries, so that, you know, those are our counterparts, and the requests for support comes from the ministries of finance. I mean, requests for financing, and priorities have to be made. Does it reflect the priorities of the countries, like the priorities of the NDC investment plans? Do they match the priorities of the countries? So those are issues that, of course, we see maybe as challenges. But as far as, you know, development banks are concerned, we are working very hard to really have the right tools and the right approaches to systematically address those issues that the NDCs are trying to tackle.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And you're basically reinforcing the point that Alhamdu was making earlier, that you as development banks have all of these tools and facilities that countries can tap on to help to support the investments. But those resources will never be enough, because we're talking about trillions. It is about how countries can leverage these wonderful resources that you have, so that they can now enable the NDCs to become bankable, so that the private sector too can invest. So you're doing what you can do to enable the countries to do this. And this is really important, because when you talk about bankability, I was very happy to be discussing with Angela earlier on, and she just said exactly what we at the African Climate Policy Center of the UN Economic Commission for Africa have been pushing. You know, very often people always say adaptation, Africa is only adaptation, mitigation. That's not true. This is a false narrative, because it creates problems, right? Because if we continue to say money for adaptation and money for mitigation, the private sector goes for cash flow. And where is the cash flow? Cash flow is in mitigation, right? But we at the African Community Policy are trying to push the idea that let's not look at adaptation or mitigation. It's adaptation and mitigation. And I was very pleased when you mentioned about that, Angela. So, and I know that you at the UNFPA have been doing something about it. So shed a bit more light about how you're using this approach of co-benefits to support NDC implementation.
So I'm very pleased to be here and this is panel and this important conversation. And UNFPA, we have been trying to look at how NDC, so actual climate action in country, address aspect of gender inequality, and to what extent the health sector has been represented in the response. And we did actually a global review of the submission of 119 NDC. And what we found that only 39 of the 119 recognize that climate change has an impact on women's health and of gender-based violence or other harmful practices. So we really see that there is a gap onto this adaptation financing. There is an opportunity to, what we found also is that despite the 39 country are recognizing the impact, only few really takes forward with the actual costed plan. And so actually one wonder what is really then be able to achieve and done on the ground in terms of And in that context, there are many opportunities of looking, for example, at co-benefit of, for example, renewable energy, a solar panel for health facility, and other kind of type of investment that can really bring adaptation investment as well as being a mitigation opportunity. So there are, what we found that there is a kind of gap in terms of how certain projects, certain country are able to scale out this kind of initiative, especially targeted for women. And we know that there are some, a lot of challenges are in hotspot area in specific community, but adaptation funding are accessed at the large platform. So there is a mismatch between the local and the global or the national type of action that needs to take place. Other things to kind of highlight is really the access to this type of funding. And so how do we support the local and community level action? And so we are looking also at that kind of component. The review of NDC that we have done really shows the gap on the costed action plan. And we also look at other aspects. So to what extent the women and girls or vulnerable group are part of the development of these policies. And to what extent at national level there is this understanding that there is an impact on women and specific vulnerable group. And I think we see there's a specific gap at various levels, so at the kind of national level, but also community level, also opportunity for women and girls and young people to engage in the policy development process and the design of locally led solution. So that's kind of the aspect that we are trying to fill, and we have identified on the NDC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela, for those perspectives. Again, re-emphasizing that let's look at adaptation and let's look at intervention, NDC's actions as co-benefits. You can use adaptation as the entry point, but make sure that you're focusing on the mitigation benefits. And equally, you can use mitigation as the entry point with adaptation, but looking at the inclusion, how there are roles and opportunities for the whole of society approach to doing that. So we were hoping, so Mr. Andosha, you are the member state here on the panel, and you have your partners, the ones with the money, African Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank, and you have your support partners, UNFPA, NDC Partnership, Economic Commission for Africa. On the way back, you'll probably be thinking in the flight, there is a big challenge in my NDC implementation I must have done. When I reach the office, I'm going to send a letter. What are you going to ask Alhamdu and Sandaye in terms of financing the biggest NDC challenge that you have? And what will be asking the rest of us who are development partners in terms of the support that you need to really take your NDC ambition forward in order to close the gap that Alhamdu mentioned earlier between ambition and action? Over to you, and then we'll close the panel and do the next one. So in your mind, if you have to send a message to the bank guys with the money and to the development partners who can provide support in other ways, what would be the top thing that you'll be asking them if you go to the office next week in order that they can increase your NDC ambition?
Can you repeat it?
Okay. So I'm saying that you are the member state here in this panel, right?
Yes, yeah.
And you have two sets of partners. You have the finance partners, the development banks, ISD, AFDB, and you have the other. Oh, wonderful. We have our member state here. Fantastic. So, okay, let me ask that question later on. So now that we have, sorry, I'm just trying to get the Rwanda. Okay. So now that we have Rwanda on board. So please, Mr. Alex Mulisa. Yeah, so you are the strategic advisor task force on access to climate finance. So you came at the right time because we were just talking about climate finance. So please, can you share with us some of the challenges, especially in terms of financing Rwanda's NDCs that you're facing? And therefore, I ask this question now back to the two of you. After you've given us some of the experiences in terms of the challenges and where you see opportunities, but also now looking at the question I was trying to ask Mr. Andoshe earlier, that as a member state, when you go back, there are some NDC action that you really, really want to get action on to increase the ambition, because Alhamdu mentioned earlier, we have ambition, action, there's a big gap. You want to close that pick one NDC item that you may need to think about it, and you're going to write to these people here. the guys in the banks, and also as the other development partners, what will be the top thing that you will be asking them next week? So start by giving us your experiences in terms of the challenges they've been seeing and some of the opportunities in implementing Rwanda's NDCs, and then to this next one, and the two of you, then they can respond, and then we sweep over to the next panel. Over to you, sir.
I'll first say I'm really sorry. You said that it is timely that I'm here. I apologize that it's not timely. I should have been here much earlier. But thank you for your consideration. At least I want to be hit on the head. Rwanda's climate journey is long, but I will make it short here with a specific focus on some of the challenges that you talked about. We have an ambitious NDC of 11 billion and almost split half in mitigation adaptation. Very ambitious mitigation targets of 38% reductions by 2030. But when it comes to adaptation, we have 80 sectors that we would want to influence, and they equally require significant resources, 5.3 billion to be exact. So challenges revolve around that. How do we mobilize that level of financing to be able to build the ambition, the climate ambition that Rwanda wants? But one thing that I want to underscore, a lot of times we talk of finance, we talk of climate finance, and we forget that this actually is tied to development. So our focus is sustainable development. And in this regard, much as the NDC intends to deliver on that, I think it would be remiss if I didn't tie it with our long-term strategy, climate strategy, which started much longer before the LOEDSs were being talked about, and has recently been revised in 2020 to reflect the level of ambition and the sense of urgency, matter of fact. So where it starts is Rwanda has a planning process, starting with a vision 2050. And alongside that, we have the Green Growth Climate Resilience Strategy that is intended to deliver the carbon neutrality and climate resilience for that vision. That's where it all begins. When you look at the vision vis-a-vis the GGCRS, matter of fact, the Green Growth Climate Resilience Strategy seems to have a bigger ambition. And in this ambition, there are a number of things that we consider. One, agriculture is still the mainstay of our economy. And then Rwanda, for those who don't know, the country is very small with the rapidly growing population. It's one of the highest populated countries in Africa. And therefore, the transition to green urbanization is very critical, so much so that the target for 2050 is 70% of Rwandans should be living in cities. What does that mean? It changes the rural landscape, it changes the urban landscape, and from a climate perspective, it requires a significant flow of financing, both development and climate-related financing, to be able to deal with those multitude of challenges. So finance again becomes critical. How do we mobilize finance that reorganizes our land use and management to be able to deal with urbanization that is that critically needed, but also in a way that is green and climate responsive? That is a big challenge, at least from Rwanda's perspective. The next thing is that we have a small private sector. When we are talking of climate finance, private sector is inevitably going to be a big contributor to this. And especially with the challenges of land structure vis-a-vis population, it becomes even more important than we find ways to be able to inject resources in the private sector in ways that make the greener transition possible. and the cost of financing. I'm not going to go into all that, as there are people who are more versed with that. So much so that one of the things we have done is to be able to say, yes, there is climate finance from public resources, but we must very quickly transition to set up a private sector facility, which we did. And thankfully, we were able to mobilize resources, $107 million to be exact, on the sidelines of COP27. But that is a drop in the ocean, considering a range of other challenges that are associated with that. Even with that money, it's going to require capacity. There is a capacity to mobilize it. There is a capacity to implement it. And we are growing in all those areas, while at the same time dealing with the critical issues. So if you asked me, three things that I would say are critical challenges on the climate finance, it's adaptation to be able to deal with these other sectors, but it is also mitigation vis-a-vis development, because we can't look at mitigation alone unless it is tied with the development to inspire greener transition or greener development. And then it is how private sector plays a role in that, and the capacities around that, but most especially in the private sector to be able to move quickly along the line. So many other issues will come along, but if we can deal with those for the immediate future, I think we'll be on our way to begin addressing over time some other challenges. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Mulisa. So I'm being reminded that we are very much out of time. So I will not ask that question I wanted to ask, but I will tell them that they should whisper to your ears when you're sitting. I reverse the question. Let them be the one that will tell you. They've heard your challenges. Let them tell you how they're going to help you, support you, not only now, but also in the conversation that will happen by email and telephone calls next week. So thank you very much, and applause for our panelists for a wonderful conversation. So since time is very much against us, I would now like to call on the next panel to come on board, please. So thank you very much. So for the next panel, we have Morocco. Do we have Mr. Tahiri in the room? No. Okay. Do we have also Kenya? Mr. Kipto is in the room? Okay. Okay, then we have we don't have the two member states then. So let me call on our panelists from the ACCF, from Mr. Alfred Nyambani. Thank you, sir. And we also call on Ms. Rita Effa, please. And Margaret from the NDC partnership. Thank you, Margaret. And then from the Commonwealth Secretariat, we need Dr. Helen Gichenje. Fantastic. So since we don't have our member states in session, and we're all the partners, so I will just ask you then, since in the interest of time, to basically go through this similar exercise that we did earlier. We had some of the challenges that the member states are facing with in terms of closing the ambition and climate action gap. What are some of the things that you are doing to support the member states in this area, including in terms of either capacity building or supporting renewable energy investment or supporting any other kind of support that you can provide? So let's start from the side of the Commonwealth Secretariat. So please give us, share with us some of the things that you are doing to support member states to close the ambition and action gap.
Okay. Thank you very much, Linus, and thank you to GGGI for the opportunity for the Commonwealth Secretariat to be at this event. The main focus of the climate change program of the Commonwealth Secretariat is enabling countries to access finance. So we have a specific program called the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub. So its main focus is providing technical assistance to countries to support them to access finance. And I think finance has been the big word in the room. We've heard about the gap. I think as assessed by various institutions, 2.8 trillion will be needed to implement the NDCs. And that translates to 300 billion a year. So I think the gap is evident. So what are we doing about that gap? For the Commonwealth Secretariat, I would say there are three things that we're doing. One is in terms of prioritization, the second in terms of policy frameworks, and the third in terms of private sector engagement. So you can think about it as 3 Ps. So prioritization, I think we've heard from the previous panel that given this gap, countries will need to prioritize what projects they are beginning to fund, either through their public resources or the private sector funding that's available. So for instance, in Mauritius, Seychelles, and Namibia, through some prioritization tool, we've assisted countries to shortlist and have available high potential projects that can be funded. On the second P, in terms of the policy frameworks, I think we've heard quite clearly from the representative, both from Rwanda as well as Namibia, Rwanda as well as Ethiopia, the issue in terms of turning your NDCs either into action plans or investment plans. And we've done that in Mauritius as well as in Zambia. In Seychelles, we've taken a different approach in terms of integrating the NDC objectives into the National Development Strategy. And this is because in Seychelles, they've just received some funding from the IMF Resilient Sustainability Facility, where these reforms are conditional for them to be able to access some funding. In relation to my third P, in terms of the private sector engagement, I think we've heard quite clearly from Rwanda that it will be important for the private sector to come in to bridge that gap. So in Eswatini, we've helped them with the strategy to enhance the private sector engagement in NDC actions. And importantly, that provided a platform for the private sector as well as the private public sector to engage. In Namibia, we took a little bit of a different approach. And there, the advisor that we had embedded within government was assisting various private sector players to be able to get accreditation to the GCF. So there we've gotten a project whereby the Agricultural Bank of Namibia, the Bank Windhoek and the Development Bank of Namibia will get accreditation support to enable their private sector to directly access funding. So I'll leave you with those 3 Ps: prioritization of projects, the policy frameworks, and the private sector engagement. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Helen. Indeed, very, very important areas, because with the privatization of projects, and then there's a project pipeline, then investors cannot say they don't have projects to invest in. Having national capacity for accessing GCF funds very important. So Margaret, NDC partnership, what are some of the things that you're doing to help countries close their gap?
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be part of this discussion, and we even appreciate the collaboration we have with the Africa NDC Hub, because at the beginning in 2018, countries would even ask, so what does the partnership do and what does the NDC Hub? But as we talk, I'm happy that even the countries you mentioned that you are supporting, Ethiopia in the room, Burkina Faso, Liberia, we are closely working together in supporting NDC and LOT-LATs. So the NDC partnership is a global initiative. It supports Africa and other regions, and we are more than 200 members now, and supporting NDC. So I just wanted to give you in Africa to see where we are, and you can see that the level on how we are supporting these countries. It means the continent is actually almost active. So when we say how ambitious are they, the countries out of 55 or 54, 42 are already with the partnership. And with the hub, I'm sure almost the continent is covered. So, and I wanted to show you that within these countries, we are actually building capacity. There are some embedded advisors we put together with my colleague here from Commonwealth. Minister of Finance is on board, Minister of Environment. That is the focal point of the partnership. And when we say building capacity, which is becoming a problem, I come to it as a challenge, but embedding experts and training them is key. As you can see now, 25 are in these countries as NDC facilitators, but also 15 embedded climate finance advisors. Big number is from Commonwealth as our partner, but there are other partners supporting that. Next slide. So the key challenges so far in those countries you have seen, you can change the slide, about 5 or 6. But you can imagine, I don't need to repeat, coordination. When you make a quick survey, you'll find coordination is highest. Coordination among the sectors, which are even within the NDC, but also coordination within us as partners. But as we talk, the partnership, its mandate is about improving coordination and complementarity. This is what we've done. Lack of data. So looking at these NDCs that are really high, like energy is one of the most prioritized, but you find that countries are still struggling to get the right data. Policy alignment. Countries, while they are doing very well, but you'll find they are struggling to align and mainstream all these streams of work we are talking about. NDC, how do you align it with LT leads, the NAP? Then there is going to be a gender mainstreaming. So this alignment is still a challenge, both at political and technical, but a lot of work is going on. Prioritization, I don't need to repeat. After putting the 2030 plan, NDC, where do you start from? You find countries are not able to know what to prioritize, but there is a lot of effort our partners are doing on this. Access to climate change, I think I meant finance. This is a huge challenge. A lot of things have been said, but this is a challenge we are working on, and it is the biggest, as I'm going to continue. Capacity, I've already talked about, which is cross-cutting, both at Minister of Finance, Minister of Environment, but across the NDC key sectors. Next slide. So the question which was looking at how countries set more ambitious emissions reduction, but also increasing on renewable energy. When I go to this question, I'm like, Africa, I think they are already leading the way. All their NDCs are much more ambitious. Actually, the most important thing is how do we translate this and support them? They need, the missing link is the level of how they are accessing climate finance. It's not matching the level of the ambition they have planned for. Most countries have taken climate change or low carbon development as a growth opportunity. You find most countries have green growth development plans. They have started planning beyond 2030, beyond the NDC, to make sure they are able to look through forward and able to prioritize. At the NDC partnership, we thought that we've decided also to look at an NDC investment guide, and we are in discussion with the GCF on this guide so that we can roll it out. But it can help on the midterm, but also on the long-term scenario planning and prioritization. That is something which countries are starting to benefit. 8 countries are already starting on this. So on the renewable energy in the question, energy sector is the critical sector. Even when you look at all NDCs, it is the highest costed in the NDCs, but it is the least support. You can say it is more supported by when you go to the climate finance, but again, it's not well done. A lot of it is missing. We still have short-term nature of support. There is less long-term planning, which is taking really not taking the ambition Africa should look at. And that's why there is a lot of initiatives when you see just the energy transition. These are some of the steps countries are trying to put in place in terms of looking at long-term. They are looking at long-term financing and predictive financing. I think the last one, I just wanted to show you how energy, the next slide, energy is among the, Yeah. Actually, this is the last slide. Yeah. Show you that renewable energy is highly prioritized apart from finance. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Margaret. And a lot of the points that you made actually echo some of the points that Helen was making earlier about prioritization, coordination, and so on, and lack of access to climate finance. But maybe since Rita is sitting next to you and speaking after you, and then maybe you can also charge a little bit more for giving her the microphone.
Thank you.
Oh, no. So since Rita is sitting next to you and I said what the two of you said, lack of access to climate finance, she's from the bank, she has money. Rita, tell us how the money that you're managing in the bank can help us to address this issue of finance for indices.
Thank you very much, Linus. And I want to also thank the colleagues for what has been said. You see the banner behind Linus. I purposefully brought it so that you will know more about this fund. I think it's less known amongst people who are looking for funding to finance grants funding to finance their NDCs, either preparation of NDCs or even LTS revision, NDC revisions or LTS development, or even to implement small-scale adaptation projects in our countries. This is a fund that has been set up at the African Development Bank that I believe it should be done as a means to which countries can receive funding. And it's not, I would say it's not as stringent as maybe accessing funding from the, it's not a loan, so it's not as stringent, yet we also have some standards to meet. Alfred is on me, he will speak. ATPES is a beneficiary of an ACCF funding, so I think this is a perfect opportunity. No. Who? Yes. Rwanda and Ethiopia. Certainly, they can and are eligible to access the funding. But let me speak to the issue that has been raised. I believe when we are looking for finance, not even climate finance, when you are looking for money to do anything, you have to look at multiple places. And so when we talk about climate finance to implement African NDCs, I believe we have to look at a multifaceted approach, but concerted. I think there's so much happening that sometimes it's even hard to track what countries are doing really in terms of achieving their NDCs themselves. At the ACCF, we are also filling in an important gap. We talked about the enabling conditions, which for me are quite important when it comes to institutional capacity strengthening, and in most cases, even developing projects out of the NDCs, projects to access large-scale funding. And these grants that we provide, the ACCF provides grants between $250,000 to $1 million per project. It might be small looking at the trillions we are looking at, but hey, a bird in hand is worth more than, but this is a catalytic fund. It's important to look at it as a catalytic fund, which, if used adequately, can help countries to mobilize even more. I'll use the case, an example from Cote d'Ivoire. Cote d'Ivoire was the government of Cote d'Ivoire, through the Ministry of Environment, were one of the beneficiaries of the fund's first call for proposals. The fund, you can access it through calls for proposals where they are competitive, yet I think that's one way to ensure transparency. So Cote d'Ivoire was a beneficiary country, and they received less than 400,000 from the ACCF, but they were able to mobilize $6 million from the adaptation fund, because with the ACCF support, they were able to develop a project which was sound enough for the adaptation fund to consider. And we have other examples for Kenya, for Cameroon, for Namibia, for Sao Tome. Alhamdu, in his opening remarks, really gave a snapshot of the countries that the ACCF, through the NDC Hub, has supported. And so for me, I think, yes, we are talking about trillions, but these technical assistance grants can really fill the void for our countries. One personal view I share is that, yes, we want African countries to implement their NDCs, but I think a lot of the times, for instance, as a multilateral development bank, we provide more money than even these grants. But it's also important that not only the Ministry of Finance that has access to, comes to the bank to borrow on behalf of the country, they shouldn't be coming alone. They should be working more with their ministries of the environment that often have that overview of the NDCs and achieving them, to ensure that right from these projects that are being implemented, which are mobilizing more resources from the MDBs, there is a clear linkage to the NDCs. I know the bank on one side has a whole climate change department, which is committed to mainstreaming climate change considerations into the projects we finance. But on our side, we are pushing. On the country side, there has to be that push, so that when you come and let's say Kenya has mobilized 10 million or something for a project in energy or agriculture, there has to be that linkage back to the NDC. So I know I'm not talking only about the ACCF, but for me, I think it's important. Sometimes we get lost in the different sources of funding. We get lost in the big trillions that we need to mobilize. But we are, if we look at it critically, I think we are working towards it, but we are not connecting the dots properly. And so maybe to conclude, as ACCF, we are open to receiving proposals from government ministries, departments, agencies, and importantly, civil society organizations, NGOs can also tap into ACCF funding. And always, even if you're a CSO or NGO, we ask that your proposal must link to the country's NDC. So we are very committed to ensuring that whether you're coming as a CSO or whether you're coming as a government, there's a clear linkage and to your NDCs. Thank you.
Fantastic. So a classic example of a NDC financing catalyst. And Mr. Afreen Nyambane, you are a beneficiary. So let's hear the proof of the pudding from the horse's own mouth.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity on behalf of the African Technology Policy Studies Network, ATPS. I also want to thank the SCCF and the FDB for giving us this opportunity. For all those things that you people have spoken about, mainly financing, there is there is a more serious gap that is about the capacity. So we at the ATPS and our partners from the project that we are beneficiaries, we are working to develop the capacity of the focal points in 12 African countries. And we are trying to train them on how to use a particular tool that we have developed to measure their NDC implementation and to be able to track their progress. This, according to our concept, should be able to trigger more ambition in terms of achieving the Paris Agreement. We are also looking at understanding how different stakeholders are working in implementation of the NDC. We have the 5 components of the NDC, but we are not able to track and look clearly what we are doing in terms of the NDCs that we have developed. So that capacity gap is what we are trying to bridge, and that is looking at 12 countries in Africa. But it is modeled in a particular way to ensure that it is some form of a TOT model where we train a particular number in a country, and then they can continue and do the capacity building. The other important thing is that we want to have an online index where, similar to the corruption index, where we can be able to see where is this country in terms of their NDC implementation, just by what they have decided as their NDC, their targets. And it is meant to trigger the other countries that are below to be able to catch up again in the different components that we are talking about: the governance, financing, adaptation, mitigation, and also the MRV. So that is our mission, and I hope we want to have all the people to support us so that we are able to push forward the implementation of the NDCs in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I was hoping that this session, being at the time that it is, would be a session where we are able to extend the time, but I've been pressurized from behind that we have to close. So there would not, unfortunately, be any time for questions, except time for closing remarks, which will be done by Mr. Okechukwu Obunaya, who is the country director for Global Green Growth Institute. But before I hand over to make the closing remarks, thank you to my panelists again for wonderful conversations. We will do it again. We'll have more time. We really need to have the conversation. So thank you very much, and thank you all for the patience.
Thank you, Linus. My job is just straightforward. Are you having a photo? Okay, I think he wants to have a photo. Of all the panelists, okay. So I'm just going to crystallize what has been said in the first panel, the second panel, and of course, the opening under 3 headings. The first one is that most of the policies are there within countries. Some of them are updated and some of them are being implemented, but there is a need for alignment, coherence. And what this means is that these policies should also link to the needed capacity. Secondly, partnerships. Partnership is key to success. The level and kind of partnership matters. You know, for example, high-level political partnership that transcends to grassroots community ownership is important for the NDCs to succeed. And how you do this will depend on who and where you partner. So there is a great example of how the member states are doing their NDCs, as well as how the strategic partners, as well as the financing or banks are supporting. And thirdly, and the most important, is climate financing. It's not enough, and I doubt it will be enough. The reason being that there is quite a lot of need. However, there are tools and mechanism facilities that member states could tap into to use as a starting point or even to leverage more financing. But the most important aspect of it is that you can as well use this to encourage or bring the private sector into implementation of the NDC partnership. And the last one is what we're actually doing here, the lessons that we are learning. How do we use these lessons, this knowledge, to plug the gaps, whether it be the gaps in capacity, whether it be the gaps in policy, whether it be the gaps in assessing financing, to ensure that the NDCs in the different countries are implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, partners. I know it's very late. I had called for a group photo of the Africa NDC Hub. We don't have our logo here, but this side event was put together by the Africa NDC Hub through our partners, the GGGI. And just to say that it is these 3-4 days have been quite charged for all our institutions. But the thing that you mentioned about partnership, we are here together as one unit. 21 institutions are within the NDC Hub. So I speak as the secretary that we really appreciate your effort. You all came and rallied behind the side event because you believe in the cause. So thank you very much. Please come forward for the group photo. Everybody here is Africa NDC Hub. So please come forward. Oh yeah, who am I? I'm Davina Mirenja from I'm from the Africa Development Bank that hosts the Africa NDC Hub. Thank you very much.
Davina is actually the coordinator of the Secretariat of the Africa NDC Hub. Yeah.